You're never really alone. Right now, as you're watching this video, trillions of tiny organisms are having a party inside your body. They're making decisions about what you'll crave for lunch. They're influencing whether you'll feel anxious at that meeting tomorrow. Hell, they might even have played a role in who you fell in love with. Sounds crazy? Here's the thing, you're not just you. You're a walking, talking ecosystem. And those microscopic residents living in your gut, they're pulling strings you didn't even know existed. For decades, scientists told us we were outnumbered 10 to 1 by bacterial cells in our own bodies. Turns out that number was wrong. Actually, it's more like 1.3 bacterial cells for every human cell. But here's what really matters. These bacteria carry about 150 times more genes than you do. Think about that. Your own genetic blueprint is basically a pamphlet compared to the encyclopedia that your microbial partners are carrying around. I remember the first time I learned about this. I was eating yogurt and suddenly realized I was essentially feeding an entire civilization. Kind of changes your perspective on breakfast, doesn't it? The numbers game. Who's really in charge here? Let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening inside your body right now. You got about 30 trillion human cells. Not bad, right? But you're also hosting around 39 trillion bacterial cells. And that's just bacteria. We're not even counting the viruses, fungi, and other microscopic residents that call you home. The old story, that 10 to 1 ratio everyone loved to quote, came from a back-of-the-envelope calculation in 1972. A microbiologist named Thomas Luckey did some quick math, and somehow his estimate became gospel for the next 40 years. Nobody really questioned it. Scientists just kept repeating it in papers, at conferences, in textbooks. It became one of those facts everyone knew. But science is supposed to question everything, right? When researchers finally took a hard look at these numbers, using modern techniques and actual measurements instead of estimates, they found something different. A team at the Weizmann Institute discovered that in a typical 70-kilogram person, that's about 154 pounds, the ratio is much closer to even. In fact, they noted something hilarious. Every time you have a bowel movement, you might temporarily have more human cells than bacterial cells. The ratio flips back and forth. Now, you might think this makes the microbiome less important. Wrong. Dead wrong. Because while the cell count might be closer to even, the genetic contribution is wildly lopsided. Your human genome has about 20,000 genes. The collective genome of your gut bacteria, we're talking about 3.3 million unique genes cataloged so far. That's not a typo. Million. These genes aren't just sitting there doing nothing. They're coding for proteins that produce vitamins you can't make yourself. They're creating enzymes that break down foods you couldn't otherwise digest. They're manufacturing neurotransmitters. Yeah, the same chemicals your brain uses to regulate mood and behavior. One study found that each person carries around 536,000 unique microbial genes. You're basically walking around with the genetic equivalent of 1,000 different bacterial species. Most people harbor at least 160 different species in their gut alone. And that's a conservative estimate. The communication highway, how bacteria talk to your brain. This is where things get really weird. Your gut has its own nervous system. Scientists call it the second brain. It contains about 500 million neurons. That's more neurons than in your spinal cord. And these neurons aren't just handling digestion. They're in constant communication with your actual brain through what researchers call the gut-brain axis. The main highway for this communication is the vagus nerve. Picture it like a biological fiber optic cable running from your gut to your brainstem. Signals zip up this nerve faster than you can consciously process them. Your gut bacteria can literally send messages to your brain before you're even aware anything's happening. But that's just one route. These bacteria are clever. They've got multiple ways to influence your thoughts and feelings. Take neurotransmitters, for example. You know serotonin, right? The happiness chemical. About 90% of your body's serotonin is produced in your gut. And guess who's involved in that production? Your bacterial residents. Different species can produce or influence the production of GABA. That's your brain's main calming chemical. Dopamine, motivation and reward, and even norepinephrine, alertness and arousal. Now, before you get too excited, these neurotransmitters made in your gut can't directly cross into your brain. There's a barrier that prevents that, but they don't need to. They affect the vagus nerve locally, sending signals up to your brain. Plus, bacteria produce other compounds that can cross that barrier. Short-chain fatty acids, for instance. These little molecules slip right through and can affect brain function directly. I learned about this the hard way when I took antibiotics for a sinus infection a few years back. Within days, I felt off, anxious, irritable. My doctor said it was probably coincidence, but knowing what I know now about how antibiotics can wipe out beneficial gut bacteria, I'm pretty sure my microbiome was staging a revolt. The immune system is another player in this communication network. Your gut bacteria are constantly interacting with immune cells in your intestines. When your bacterial balance is off, it can trigger inflammation. And inflammation doesn't just stay in your gut. Inflammatory signals travel throughout your body, including to your brain. Researchers have found that people with depression often have higher levels of inflammation markers. Coincidence? Probably not. Here's something that'll really bake your noodle. These bacteria can even influence your genes. Not change them, exactly, but affect whether certain genes get turned on or off. It's called epigenetics. Bacterial metabolites can modify how your DNA is packaged, making some genes more or less accessible. These changes can affect everything from neurotransmitter production to stress response. And the blood-brain barrier itself? That protective wall that keeps potentially harmful substances out of your brain? Your gut bacteria influence how permeable it is. Certain bacterial metabolites can make it more or less leaky. When it's too permeable, things that shouldn't get into your brain can sneak through. Scientists have discovered that your brain actually has receptors specifically designed to detect bacterial components. These pattern recognition receptors can identify different types of bacteria, allowing your brain to respond differently to friendly bacteria versus potential pathogens. Your brain is literally listening for bacterial signals. Personality in a petri dish, the microbial influence on who you are. Okay, this is where things get personal. Literally. Researchers have found that the bacteria in your gut are associated with your personality traits. Not just your mood on any given day, but your actual personality, those supposedly stable characteristics that make you, well, you. Let me tell you about this study that kind of blew my mind. Scientists analyzed the gut bacteria of people and then had them take personality tests. Standard psychological assessments, the kind used in research all the time. What they found was that people with more diverse gut bacteria, meaning lots of different species, tended to be more social. They had larger social networks. They were more outgoing. On the flip side, people with less diverse gut bacteria showed higher levels of anxiety and stress. They were more likely to be introverted. And this held true even after controlling for diet, age, gender, and other factors that might influence both personality and gut bacteria. But wait, it gets weirder. Specific bacteria were linked to specific traits. Akkermansia, for example, was associated with lower neuroticism. People with more of this bacteria were generally calmer, less prone to worry. Meanwhile, people with higher levels of lactobacillus showed different patterns of social behavior. Now, I know what you're thinking. Correlation doesn't equal causation, right? Just because certain bacteria are associated with certain personality traits doesn't mean the bacteria are causing those traits. Fair point. But here's where animal studies come in. Researchers have taken gut bacteria from anxious mice and transplanted them into calm mice. The result? The calm mice became anxious. They've done the reverse too, taking bacteria from calm mice and giving them to anxious ones. The anxious mice chilled out. They've even done this with humans and mice. Scientists took gut bacteria from people with depression and gave it to mice. The mice developed depression-like behaviors. They lost interest in pleasurable activities. They showed signs of despair in behavioral tests. Mice getting depressed from human gut bacteria. The mechanisms are starting to make sense now, aren't they? If bacteria can produce neurotransmitters, influence inflammation, and affect gene expression, of course, they can influence personality. Your gut bacteria are literally producing chemicals that affect your brain function. Different bacterial communities produce different chemical cocktails, leading to different behavioral tendencies. There's this fascinating study about social behavior and the microbiome. Researchers found that people who consumed naturally fermented foods, things like yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, showed lower levels of social anxiety compared to people who took probiotic supplements. The same bacteria, but different effects depending on how they were consumed. It suggests that the food matrix matters, that there's something about getting these bacteria from whole foods that's different from taking them in pill form. Actually, I noticed this myself. I went through a phase where I was taking expensive probiotic supplements, thinking I was doing something good for my health. Didn't notice much difference. Then I started eating kimchi regularly. My Korean neighbor makes incredible kimchi and shares it with me. Within a few weeks, I felt different, more energized, less anxious about little things. Could be placebo, sure, but given what the research shows, maybe not. Depression is particularly interesting when it comes to gut bacteria. Large-scale studies in Europe found that people with depression consistently lack two specific types of bacteria, Coprococcus and Gelister. This finding held across different populations, Belgian, Dutch, different age groups. These bacteria appear to have pathways for producing dopamine-related compounds. Dopamine, as you probably know, is crucial for motivation and pleasure. Without these bacteria, people might literally have less capacity for experiencing joy. The relationship goes both ways, too. Stress and anxiety can alter your gut bacteria. When you're stressed, your body produces cortisol. Cortisol changes the environment in your gut, the pH, the mucus production, the speed of digestion. These changes favor certain bacteria over others. Typically, stress promotes the growth of potentially harmful bacteria while suppressing beneficial ones. It's a vicious cycle. Stress alters your gut bacteria, which makes you more prone to stress, which further alters your gut bacteria. However, this bidirectional relationship also means there's opportunity for intervention. If changing gut bacteria can influence personality and mood, then maybe we can use this knowledge therapeutically. And that's exactly what researchers are exploring now. The food connection. Your cravings aren't always yours. Ever wonder why you suddenly crave chocolate at 3 p.m.? Or why, after eating healthy for weeks, you find yourself desperately wanting pizza? Here's a mind-bending possibility. Those cravings might not be coming from you. They might be coming from your gut bacteria. Different bacteria thrive on different foods. Some love sugar. Others prefer fiber. Some feast on fats. And here's the kicker. They can manipulate you into feeding them what they want. How do they do this? Several ways, actually. First, they produce compounds that interact with your taste receptors. Certain bacteria can make foods taste better or worse to you. They can enhance the reward you feel from eating specific foods. Second, they hijack your reward pathways. Remember those neurotransmitters we talked about? When certain bacteria get the foods they want, they produce dopamine precursors. You literally feel good when you eat what they want you to eat. There's this study where researchers looked at people who craved chocolate versus people who were indifferent to it. The chocolate cravers had different gut bacteria than the non-cravers. Different bacterial signatures in their urine metabolites, too. The bacteria weren't just passive observers of food preferences. They were active participants in creating those preferences. I've experienced this myself, and maybe you have too. A few years back, I cut sugar from my diet. The first week was hell. Intense cravings, irritability, the works. But after about 2 weeks, something shifted. The cravings just stopped. Looking back, I wonder if what really happened was that I starved out my sugar-loving bacteria and gave other species a chance to flourish. The manipulation goes deeper than just cravings. Your gut bacteria can affect how many calories you extract from food. People with certain bacterial profiles extract more energy from the same amount of food. Two people can eat identical meals, and one person might absorb 100 more calories than the other purely because of their gut bacteria. There's a type of bacteria called firmicutes that's particularly good at extracting energy from food. People with obesity tend to have more firmicutes and fewer bacteroidetes. When they lose weight, this ratio shifts. But here's the interesting part. Transplanting bacteria from obese mice to lean mice causes the lean mice to gain weight, even when eating the same amount of food. Your bacteria also influence your satiety, how full you feel after eating. They produce hormones like GLP-1 and PYY that signal fullness to your brain. Different bacterial communities produce different amounts of these hormones. Some bacterial profiles might leave you feeling constantly hungry, while others help you feel satisfied with less food. The timing of your hunger is influenced too. Certain bacteria have circadian rhythms, just like you do. They're more active at certain times of day. When they're active, they're consuming nutrients and producing metabolites. These metabolites can trigger hunger or satiety signals. That afternoon snack craving might be your bacteria's feeding schedule, not yours. The dating game, how bacteria influence attraction. This is going to sound completely insane, but stay with me. Your gut bacteria might influence who you're attracted to. And who's attracted to you? Let's start with smell. You know how everyone has their own unique scent? That's partly due to your bacteria. The microbes on your skin break down proteins and lipids, producing volatile compounds. These compounds create your personal odor signature. And that signature contains information about your immune system, your health, even your genetic compatibility with potential partners. Studies have shown that people are more attracted to the scent of others with different immune system genes. This makes evolutionary sense. Mating with someone who has different immune genes gives your offspring a more diverse immune system. But how do we detect these differences? Through smell. And that smell is created, in part, by bacteria. Women's preferences for male scent change throughout their menstrual cycle. During ovulation, when fertility is highest, women prefer the scent of men with different immune genes. But here's where it gets weird. This preference disappears when women are on hormonal birth control. The pill changes the vaginal microbiome, which might alter scent preferences. Speaking of the vaginal microbiome, it plays a huge role in reproductive health and partner selection. A healthy vaginal microbiome is dominated by lactobacillus species. These bacteria produce lactic acid, maintaining an acidic environment that prevents infections. But they also produce compounds that might influence attraction and bonding. There's evidence that couples who live together develop similar microbiomes. You're literally sharing bacteria with your partner through kissing, touching, and other activities. Over time, your bacterial communities converge. Some researchers think this might even strengthen pair bonding. you become bacterially compatible. Actually, there's this fascinating study about kissing. A 10-second kiss transfers about 80 million bacteria. Couples who kiss frequently, more than 9 times a day, have similar oral microbiomes. Their bacteria have essentially merged into a shared community. Your gut bacteria might even influence your social behavior in ways that affect your romantic life. Remember those studies about social anxiety and gut bacteria? People with certain bacterial profiles are more socially confident, more likely to engage with potential partners. Others might be more anxious, more withdrawn. And then there's the role of oxytocin, the love hormone. Certain gut bacteria can influence oxytocin production. Lactobacillus reuteri, for example, has been shown to increase oxytocin levels in mice. Higher oxytocin is associated with increased social bonding, trust, and attachment. Imagine that. Bacteria potentially influencing your ability to form romantic connections. The connection between gut health and sexual health is real too. Men with poor gut health often have lower testosterone levels. Women with imbalanced gut bacteria might have irregular menstrual cycles or fertility issues. Your gut bacteria influence hormone metabolism, affecting estrogen and testosterone levels. These hormones obviously play huge roles in attraction and sexual behavior. I know someone who swears their dating life improved after they fixed their gut health. They've been having digestive issues for years, finally saw a specialist, got their gut bacteria tested, and started a targeted probiotic and diet regimen. Within months, they said they felt more confident, more energetic, more interested in dating. Coincidence? Maybe, but maybe not. The antibiotic apocalypse. What happens when we nuke our bacteria? Let's talk about what happens when we wage war on our bacterial partners. Because that's essentially what antibiotics do. They're nuclear weapons for your microbiome. Don't get me wrong, antibiotics save lives. They've prevented countless deaths from bacterial infections. But we've been using them like a sledgehammer when sometimes we need a scalpel. And the collateral damage to our microbiomes has been massive. A single course of antibiotics can alter your gut bacteria for months, sometimes years. Some bacterial species might never fully recover. It's like clear-cutting a forest. Sure, plants will grow back, but the ecosystem might never be quite the same. Children who take antibiotics in their first year of life have higher rates of asthma, allergies, and obesity later on. The timing matters because early life is when the microbiome is establishing itself. Those first bacterial colonizers set the stage for what comes later. Disrupting them with antibiotics can have lasting effects. The personality and mood effects of antibiotics are just beginning to be understood. There are case reports of people developing severe anxiety or depression after taking certain antibiotics. Fluoroquinolones, a common class of antibiotics, carry FDA warnings about psychiatric side effects. These aren't rare, extreme cases. Studies suggest that antibiotic use is associated with increased risk of depression and anxiety in the general population. Here's a personal story that hits close to home. My friend's daughter was prescribed antibiotics repeatedly for ear infections as a toddler. By age 5, she was diagnosed with severe anxiety. The psychiatrist never asked about antibiotic use. The connection wasn't made until years later when my friend read about the gut-brain axis. Was the anxiety caused by the antibiotics? Impossible to know for sure, but the timing is suspicious. The problem isn't just that antibiotics kill bacteria indiscriminately. It's that they create an opportunity for harmful bacteria to take over. When you wipe out the normal bacterial community, you leave space for opportunistic pathogens. C. Difficile infections, which can be deadly, often occur after antibiotic use for this exact reason. However, not all antibiotics are equal in their destruction. Some are broad spectrum, killing a wide range of bacteria. Others are more targeted. Researchers are working on developing antibiotics that are even more specific, targeting only harmful bacteria while leaving beneficial ones alone. But we're not there yet. The recovery process after antibiotics is crucial but often ignored. Doctors rarely talk about microbiome restoration after prescribing antibiotics. You get your prescription, take your pills, and that's it. No discussion of probiotics, prebiotics, or dietary changes to help your bacteria recover. Some researchers are experimenting with bacterial cocktails to restore the microbiome after antibiotic treatment. The idea is to reintroduce key bacterial species that were wiped out. Early results are promising, but we're still figuring out which bacteria are most important and in what proportions. Breaking the myths, what we got wrong about bacteria. For decades, we've been obsessed with killing bacteria. Antibacterial soap, hand sanitizer, surface disinfectants. We've created a culture of bacterial paranoia. But here's the thing, we got it backwards. Most bacteria aren't trying to kill you. They're trying to keep you alive. The hygiene hypothesis suggests that our obsession with cleanliness might be making us sicker. Children who grow up on farms, exposed to diverse bacteria from animals and soil, have lower rates of allergies and asthma. Kids who grow up with dogs have more diverse microbiomes and stronger immune systems. We've been protecting ourselves from the very thing that protects us. Think about it. Bacteria have been around for 3.5 billion years. Humans, about 300,000 years. We evolved in a world full of bacteria. Our bodies are designed to work with them, not against them. The idea that we could or should live in a sterile environment is not just impossible. It's harmful. The traditional view of the immune system was that it existed to fight off invaders. But we're learning it's more like a bouncer at a club, not trying to keep everyone out, just managing who gets in and making sure everyone behaves. Your immune system is constantly negotiating with bacteria, deciding which ones to tolerate and which ones to attack. Here's another myth, that each person has one stable microbiome. Nope. Your bacterial community is constantly changing. It shifts with your diet, your stress levels, your sleep patterns, even the seasons. What you ate for breakfast this morning is already changing your bacterial populations. People used to think the womb was sterile, that babies were born without any bacteria. Wrong again. Recent research has found bacterial DNA in placentas and amniotic fluid. Babies might be getting their first bacterial exposure before they're even born. Although there's still debate about whether these are living bacteria or just bacterial components. The idea that probiotics are always good is another oversimplification. Not all probiotics are created equal. Different strains do different things. Taking random probiotics without knowing what you need is like taking random medications and hoping one helps. Some probiotics might even be harmful for certain people in certain situations. And the good bacteria versus bad bacteria narrative? Way too simple. Most bacteria are context dependent. E. coli in your gut? Normal and often beneficial. E. coli in your urinary tract? That's a UTI. The same bacteria can be helpful or harmful depending on where it is and what else is around. Oh, and that thing about yogurt being an ancient probiotic superfood? Well, yes and no. Traditional fermented foods do contain beneficial bacteria, but most commercial yogurts are pasteurized after fermentation, killing the bacteria. And the strains they add back might not even survive your stomach acid to reach your intestines. The yogurt your great-grandmother made is not the same as the stuff in the grocery store. I learned this the hard way when I started buying expensive probiotic yogurts thinking I was doing something great for my gut. Turns out, most of the bacteria were probably dead before they even left the factory. Now I make my own kefir. It's easier than you'd think, and the bacterial diversity is way higher than anything you can buy. The stress gut spiral. When your bacteria feel your anxiety. You know that feeling when you're nervous and your stomach starts doing flips? Or when stress makes you run to the bathroom? That's not just in your head. Well, actually, it's your head talking to your gut and your gut talking back. Stress doesn't just affect you. It affects your bacterial residence too. When you're stressed, your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones change the environment in your gut. The pH shifts. Blood flow changes. The mucus lining gets thinner or thicker. Your bacteria notice all of this. Some bacteria actually have receptors for human stress hormones. They can directly sense when you're freaking out, and they respond. Some species multiply faster under stress. Others produce different compounds. The entire bacterial community can shift in response to your emotional state. Here's where it gets really interesting or terrifying, depending on how you look at it. Stress tends to favor the growth of potentially harmful bacteria while suppressing beneficial ones. E. coli, for instance, grows faster in the presence of norepinephrine, a stress hormone. Meanwhile, beneficial lactobacillus species often decrease during stress. This creates a vicious cycle. Stress alters your gut bacteria. The altered bacteria produce compounds that make you more sensitive to stress. You feel more stressed. Your bacteria get more imbalanced. Round and round it goes. I experienced this firsthand during a particularly rough period at work a few years back. Deadline after deadline, barely sleeping, living on coffee and whatever I could grab from vending machines. Within weeks, my digestion was a mess. But more than that, I felt anxious all the time. Even when the work stress let up, the anxiety lingered. It took months of deliberate diet changes and stress management to feel normal again. Studies on medical students during exam periods show this pattern clearly. Their gut bacteria change significantly during high-stress times. Beneficial bacteria decrease. Inflammatory markers increase. And these changes correlate with reported anxiety and depression levels. The military has been particularly interested in this connection. Soldiers in high-stress combat situations often develop gut issues. But researchers found that soldiers with more diverse gut bacteria before deployment were more resilient to PTSD. Their microbiomes seem to provide a buffer against psychological trauma. Animal studies reveal the mechanisms. Mice raised in sterile environments, no bacteria at all, have exaggerated stress responses. Their cortisol spikes higher and stays elevated longer than normal mice. But give them certain bacteria, particularly lactobacillus strains, and their stress response normalizes. There's this fascinating experiment where researchers stressed pregnant mice. The stress altered the mother's gut bacteria. But here's the kicker, it also affected the gut bacteria of their offspring. The baby mice were born with different bacterial communities and showed increased anxiety-like behavior. The stress was literally passed down through bacterial changes. Actually, human studies suggest something similar. Mothers who experience high stress during pregnancy have babies with different gut bacteria. These babies are more likely to have colic, sleep problems, and later behavioral issues. The mom's stress shapes the baby's first bacterial colonizers. The timing of stress matters too. Early life stress, trauma, neglect, abuse leaves lasting marks on the microbiome. Adults who experience childhood trauma have different gut bacteria than those who didn't. These bacterial differences might partly explain why childhood trauma increases the risk of mental health issues later in life. But here's some good news. The stress-gut connection works both ways. Just as stress can harm your bacteria, improving your bacteria can make you more stress resilient. Studies show that certain probiotics can reduce cortisol levels and improve stress response. People taking specific bacterial strains report feeling calmer and sleeping better during stressful periods. The exercise factor, working out your bacteria. Your gut bacteria have opinions about your exercise habits. Skip the gym for a week and your bacterial community notices. Start a new workout routine and different bacteria begin to thrive. Athletes have distinctly different gut bacteria than sedentary people. They have greater bacterial diversity, which is generally associated with better health. They have more bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate, which has anti-inflammatory effects and provides energy for gut cells. The differences are dramatic. One study looked at professional rugby players versus sedentary controls. The athletes had 40% more bacterial diversity. They had higher levels of Akkermansia, a bacteria associated with lower body fat and better metabolic health. The athletes also had different ratios of firmicutes to Bacteroidetes, the two major bacterial groups in the gut. But you don't need to be a professional athlete to see benefits. Even moderate exercise changes your gut bacteria. People who exercise regularly have more beneficial bacteria and fewer potentially harmful ones. The changes can happen quickly, within weeks of starting a new exercise program. Here's what's wild. The type of exercise matters. Aerobic exercise seems to have different effects than resistance training. Runners develop different bacterial profiles than weightlifters. Yoga practitioners show unique changes too, possibly because yoga combines physical activity with stress reduction. Exercise affects your bacteria through multiple pathways. First, it changes gut transit time, how quickly food moves through your system. This affects which bacteria thrive. Second, exercise alters blood flow to the gut, changing the oxygen levels and nutrient availability. Third, exercise reduces inflammation, creating a more hospitable environment for beneficial bacteria. The temperature changes during exercise might matter too. Your core body temperature rises, and some bacteria handle this better than others. It's like a daily selection pressure, favoring heat-tolerant species. I noticed this myself when I started running regularly. The digestive issues I'd struggled with for years gradually improved. But when I injured my knee and had to stop running for 2 months, the problems came back. It wasn't just the exercise I missed. My gut literally felt different. There's growing evidence that some of exercise's mental health benefits come through the gut. Exercise increases bacterial production of neurotransmitter precursors. It promotes bacteria that produce anti-inflammatory compounds. These changes might partly explain why exercise is so effective for depression and anxiety. The relationship goes both ways here too. Your gut bacteria influence your exercise capacity. Certain bacteria help extract more energy from food, providing fuel for workouts. Others produce compounds that reduce fatigue and improve endurance. Scientists have even transplanted gut bacteria from athletic mice to sedentary mice. The sedentary mice showed improved endurance. They could run longer without any training, just from getting athletic bacteria. Imagine that, performance-enhancing bacteria. Some researchers are exploring whether elite athletes have superbacteria that could be used to enhance performance in others. They've identified certain bacterial strains that are enriched in Olympic athletes. Could these become the probiotics of the future? Maybe. But before you start hunting for athlete poop transplants, yes, that's a thing being studied. Remember that exercise and bacteria work together. You can't just take athletic bacteria and sit on the couch. The bacteria need the exercise stimulus to thrive and produce their beneficial effects. The sleep connection. Why your bacteria care about your bedtime. Your gut bacteria have circadian rhythms, just like you do. They have their own internal clocks, cycling through periods of activity and rest. And when your sleep schedule gets messed up, so does theirs. Different bacteria are active at different times of day. Some are morning bacteria, breaking down your breakfast and producing energizing compounds. Others are night shift workers, handling dinner and producing calming metabolites. This bacterial rhythm influences your own circadian clock. Jet lag doesn't just affect you, it affects your bacteria too. Studies on people flying across time zones show that their gut bacteria become dysregulated. The bacterial rhythms get out of sync with each other and with the host. This might partly explain why jet lag feels so awful and takes so long to recover from. Shift workers have consistently different gut bacteria than people who work regular hours. They have less bacterial diversity, more potentially harmful species, and altered metabolite production. These bacterial changes might contribute to the increased health risks associated with shift work, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, depression. Sleep deprivation wreaks havoc on your microbiome. Just 2 nights of shortened sleep can alter your gut bacteria. The ratio of firmicutes to bacteroidetes shifts, the same change associated with obesity. Bacteria that produce inflammatory compounds increase. Here's a mind bender. Your bacteria might influence how well you sleep. Certain bacteria produce GABA, the brain's main calming neurotransmitter. Others produce serotonin, which gets converted to melatonin, the sleep hormone. Still, others produce compounds that affect your core body temperature, which needs to drop for good sleep. People with insomnia have different gut bacteria than good sleepers. They tend to have less bacterial diversity and different metabolite profiles. They have altered production of short-chain fatty acids, which influence sleep through immune and metabolic pathways. The quality of your sleep matters as much as the quantity. People with sleep apnea, where breathing repeatedly stops during sleep, have distinct bacterial signatures. The repeated oxygen deprivation might create an environment that favors certain bacteria over others. I learned about this connection the hard way. During a period of terrible insomnia, I tried everything: melatonin, meditation, prescription sleep aids. Nothing worked consistently. Then I read about the gut-sleep connection and decided to try improving my gut health. Started eating fermented foods, taking specific probiotics, adjusting meal timing. Within a month, my sleep improved dramatically. Coincidence? Maybe, but I'll take it. There's this interesting study where researchers gave people prebiotics, fibers that feed beneficial bacteria. The people who took prebiotics showed improved sleep quality on EEG readings. They spent more time in restorative deep sleep. They also handled stress better the next day. Your bacteria even influence your dreams. The metabolites they produce can affect REM sleep when most dreaming occurs. People with certain bacterial profiles report more vivid dreams, while others rarely remember dreaming at all. The timing of eating affects both your bacteria and your sleep. Late night eating disrupts bacterial rhythms and sleep quality. Your bacteria need a fasting period to properly cycle through their activities. Constant grazing keeps them in a perpetual state of confusion. The inflammation investigation: your bacteria as firefighters or arsonists. Inflammation is like fire in your body. A little bit, controlled and targeted, helps fight infections and heal injuries. But chronic, systemic inflammation? That's a wildfire that damages everything in its path. And your gut bacteria are right in the middle of this, either fanning the flames or working as firefighters. Your intestinal wall is just one cell thick in places. One cell. That's all that separates your gut bacteria from your bloodstream. This barrier is critical. When it becomes too permeable, what some call leaky gut, bacterial components can escape into your body, triggering inflammation. Certain bacteria strengthen this barrier. They produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that feed the intestinal cells, keeping them healthy and tightly connected. Others produce mucus that adds an extra protective layer. But harmful bacteria can weaken the barrier, producing toxins that damage the intestinal lining. Lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, is a component of certain bacterial cell walls. When LPS leaks into the bloodstream, your immune system goes into red alert. It triggers inflammation throughout your body. People with depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions often have elevated LPS levels. Here's what's particularly interesting. Different bacteria produce different types of LPS. Some are highly inflammatory, others less so. The composition of your gut bacteria determines how much inflammatory potential exists in your gut. Your diet directly influences this inflammatory potential. High-fat, high-sugar diets tend to promote bacteria that produce inflammatory compounds. They also reduce bacteria that produce anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acids. It's a double whammy. Fiber is your friend here. When beneficial bacteria ferment fiber, they produce butyrate, propionate, and acetate, all anti-inflammatory compounds. But most people in Western countries eat nowhere near enough fiber. We're literally starving our anti-inflammatory bacteria. I saw this play out with my dad. He had chronic joint pain for years, tried various medications with limited success. His doctor never mentioned gut health. But when he dramatically increased his fiber intake, we're talking beans, vegetables, whole grains, his inflammation markers dropped and his pain decreased. His rheumatologist was shocked. The brain is particularly sensitive to inflammation. The blood-brain barrier, which protects your brain from harmful substances, can become more permeable during inflammation. Inflammatory molecules sneak through, affecting brain function. This neuroinflammation is linked to depression, anxiety, brain fog, and even neurodegenerative diseases. Your gut bacteria influence neuroinflammation through multiple pathways. They affect systemic inflammation, which signals the brain. They produce metabolites that can cross the blood-brain barrier and directly affect brain inflammation. They communicate with immune cells that travel between the gut and brain. Certain bacteria are particularly good at controlling inflammation. Faecalibacterium prosnitzi, for instance, is a major butyrate producer with strong anti-inflammatory effects. People with inflammatory bowel disease, depression, and other inflammatory conditions often lack this bacteria. Akkermansia mucinifera is another anti-inflammatory superstar. It strengthens the gut barrier, reduces LPS leakage, and produces compounds that calm immune responses. Low levels of Akkermansia are associated with obesity, diabetes, and inflammation. But here's the thing. You can't just take these bacteria as probiotics. Not yet. Anyway, researchers are working on it. They're anaerobic, meaning they die in oxygen. They need to be cultivated by feeding the bacteria you already have. The pharmaceutical industry is very interested in this. They're developing drugs that mimic bacterial metabolites or target bacterial pathways. But why wait for expensive drugs when you can influence your bacteria through diet and lifestyle? Actually, some medications work partly through their effects on gut bacteria. Metformin, a diabetes drug, changes the gut microbiome in ways that might explain some of its benefits. Some antidepressants have antimicrobial effects that alter gut bacteria. We're just beginning to understand how many drugs work through the microbiome. The development timeline, from womb to tomb. Your relationship with bacteria starts before you're even born. Scientists used to think the womb was sterile, but we're finding bacterial DNA in placentas, amniotic fluid, and meconium, a baby's first poop. Whether these are living bacteria or just bacterial fragments is still debated. But either way, Your immune system starts learning about bacteria before birth. The real bacterial colonization begins during birth. Vaginal delivery coats babies in their mother's vaginal and fecal bacteria, mostly lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. C-section babies miss this bacterial bath. Instead, they're first colonized by skin bacteria and whatever's floating around the operating room. This difference matters. C-section babies have higher rates of asthma, allergies, obesity, and even autism. Now, correlation doesn't equal causation, and C-sections save lives. But the bacterial difference is one possible explanation for these increased risks. Some hospitals are experimenting with vaginal seeding, swabbing C-section babies with their mother's vaginal fluids to transfer bacteria. Breastfeeding is the next major bacterial influence. Breast milk isn't sterile. It contains hundreds of bacterial species. But here's what's really clever. Breast milk also contains special sugars called oligosaccharides that humans can't digest. They're not for the baby. They're food for specific beneficial bacteria, particularly Bifidobacterium infantis. Formula-fed, babies develop different bacteria. They have more diverse, but less stable communities. They're more likely to have potentially harmful bacteria. Again, sometimes formula is necessary, and modern formulas are getting better at mimicking breast milk's bacterial benefits. But the difference is real. The first 3 years of life are critical for microbiome development. This is when your core bacterial community establishes itself. Disruptions during this period, antibiotics, poor diet, stress, can have lasting effects. It's like building a house. If the foundation is shaky, problems show up later. By age 3, a child's microbiome looks basically adult-like in composition, but it continues developing through childhood and adolescence. Puberty brings another shift with hormonal changes affecting bacterial populations. DNS, partly bacterial. Mood swings? Your bacteria might be contributing. Your microbiome is most diverse and stable in early adulthood. This is the golden age for your bacteria. But as you hit middle age, things start changing. Bacterial diversity often decreases. The immune system weakens, allowing different bacteria to flourish. Digestion slows, changing the gut environment. The elderly often have very different gut bacteria than younger adults. They have less diversity, fewer beneficial species, more potentially harmful ones. This might contribute to age-related health issues, inflammation, cognitive decline, frailty. But elderly people who remain healthy tend to maintain more youthful bacterial profiles. I saw this with my grandmother. At 85, she was sharp as a tack, active, healthy. She ate fermented foods daily, pickles, yogurt, sauerkraut. When she passed at 92, she never had major health issues. Meanwhile, her sister, who lived on processed foods, developed dementia in her 70s. Genetics? Lifestyle? Bacteria? Probably all three. Diet is the fastest way to change a bacteria at any age. Major dietary shifts can alter your microbiome within days. But these changes are usually temporary unless you maintain the new diet. Your bacteria have memory. They tend to bounce back to their previous state. However, sustained dietary changes can create lasting shifts. People who eat Mediterranean diets for years develop characteristic bacterial profiles. Same with vegetarians or people who eat lots of fermented foods. Your long-term dietary patterns shape your bacterial ecosystem. Antibiotics remain the most dramatic disruptor across the lifespan. Children who take multiple courses of antibiotics show altered bacterial development. Adults can have their microbiomes disrupted for months. The elderly, with already fragile bacterial communities, might never fully recover. Geographic location influences your bacteria too. People in different countries have different microbiomes. Rural populations have more diverse bacteria than urban dwellers. Traditional societies have bacterial species that are rare or absent in industrialized populations. We've lost bacterial diversity through modernization, and we're only beginning to understand the consequences. The mental health revolution, psychobiotics, and the future of psychiatry. Psychiatry is having a gut check moment. For decades, mental health treatment focused on the brain, understandably. But we're realizing that treating the brain without considering the gut is like trying to fix a computer while ignoring its power source. The term psychobiotics was coined to describe probiotics that influence mental health. These aren't your average yogurt bacteria. These are specific strains shown to affect mood, anxiety, and cognition. And the research is exploding. Lactobacillus helveticus and Bifidobacterium longum, taken together, reduced depression and anxiety in multiple human studies. The effects were comparable to prescription medications, but without the side effects. People reported better mood, less anxiety, improved sleep. Lactobacillus rhamnosus has been dubbed the Zen bacteria for its anti-anxiety effects. In mice, it works as well as Valium for reducing anxiety. Human studies are underway with promising early results. But here's the thing. Not all probiotics work for all people. Your existing microbiome influences whether new bacteria can colonize and have effects. It's like trying to plant a garden. The soil conditions determine what will grow. Prebiotics might be even more important than probiotics. Instead of adding new bacteria, prebiotics feed the beneficial bacteria you already have. Fructooligosaccharides, galactooligosaccharides, resistant starch. These fibers selectively promote beneficial bacteria. Studies show prebiotics can improve stress response, reduce anxiety, and enhance cognition. They work by increasing production of short-chain fatty acids and other beneficial metabolites. And unlike probiotics, which might not survive your stomach acid, prebiotics definitely reach your colon where bacteria can use them. The pharmaceutical industry is paying attention. They're developing drugs that target the microbiome gut-brain axis. Some mimic bacterial metabolites. Others alter bacterial populations. A few target the communication pathways between gut and brain. But there's a problem with the pharmaceutical approach. Your microbiome is incredibly complex and individual. A drug that helps one person might harm another, depending on their bacterial composition. We need personalized approaches. That's where microbiome testing comes in. Companies now offer gut bacteria analysis, telling you which species you have and in what proportions. The technology is improving rapidly and costs are dropping. Soon, microbiome testing might be as routine as blood tests. I tried one of these tests last year. The results were fascinating and actionable. I was low in certain beneficial species, so I adjusted my diet to feed those bacteria. I added specific prebiotics. Within months, my retesting showed improvements, and I felt different. More energy, better mood, clearer thinking. The potential for treating mental health through the gut is enormous. Depression affects over 300 million people worldwide. Anxiety disorders affect even more. Current treatments don't work for everyone and often have significant side effects. If we can help even a fraction of these people through microbiome interventions, that's revolutionary. But we need to be careful not to oversell this. The microbiome isn't the only factor in mental health. Genetics, life experiences, social factors, they all matter. The gut-brain axis is one piece of a complex puzzle. Some psychiatrists are already incorporating microbiome thinking into their practice. They're asking about diet, recommending probiotics, suggesting fermented foods. They're recognizing that mental health isn't just about the brain. The food pharmacy, eating for your bacteria. If your gut bacteria influence your mood, personality, and health, then your kitchen is basically a pharmacy. Every meal is a chance to feed beneficial bacteria or harmful ones. Every food choice shifts your internal ecosystem. Fiber is the master key. Your beneficial bacteria ferment fiber into short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionate, acetate. These compounds reduce inflammation, strengthen the gut barrier, influence gene expression, and even affect brain function. But here's the kicker: 95% of Americans don't eat enough fiber. The recommended daily intake is 25 to 35 grams. Most people get maybe 15. Our ancestors probably ate 100 plus grams daily. We're literally starving our beneficial bacteria. Different fibers feed different bacteria, so diversity matters. Beans feed certain species. Whole grains feed others. Vegetables, fruits, nuts, they all promote different bacterial populations. The more diverse your plant intake, the more diverse your microbiome. Fermented foods are bacterial bombs, in a good way. Yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh. These foods contain living bacteria plus the beneficial compounds those bacteria produce. Traditional societies that eat lots of fermented foods have more diverse microbiomes and lower rates of mental health issues. But not all fermented foods are equal. Most commercial yogurts are pasteurized after fermentation, killing the bacteria. That pickle from the grocery store? Probably made with vinegar, not fermentation. Real fermented foods are found in refrigerated sections, or better yet, made at home. I started making my own ferments a couple years ago. Sauerkraut is stupidly easy, just cabbage and salt. Kefir takes 5 minutes of actual work. The taste is amazing, way better than store-bought. And knowing I'm feeding my bacteria billions of allies feels good. Polyphenol are another bacterial favorite. These plant compounds, found in berries, green tea, dark chocolate, red wine, aren't well absorbed by human cells. But bacteria transform them into bioactive compounds that reduce inflammation and protect brain health. Here's something weird. Artificial sweeteners, marketed as healthy alternatives to sugar, might actually harm your microbiome. Studies show they can reduce bacterial diversity and promote glucose intolerance. Your bacteria apparently don't like being tricked. The timing of eating matters too. Time-restricted feeding, eating within an 8 to 12-hour window, helps maintain bacterial circadian rhythms. Your bacteria need a fasting period to properly cycle through their activities. Constant snacking keeps them confused. Resistant starch deserves special mention. This type of starch resists digestion in your small intestine, reaching your colon intact where bacteria fermented. Cooked and cooled potatoes, green bananas, legumes. These foods are bacterial superfoods. The Mediterranean diet keeps coming up in microbiome research. High in fiber, fermented foods, and polyphenol. Low in processed foods and sugar. People who follow this diet have more diverse bacteria and lower rates of depression and anxiety. But here's what nobody talks about. Changing your diet can temporarily make you feel worse. When you suddenly increase fiber, different bacteria start growing. They produce gas. You might feel bloated, uncomfortable. This usually passes within a few weeks as your microbiome adjusts. But many people quit before the benefits kick in. The future frontier, where microbiome science is heading. We're in the early days of understanding the microbiome. It's like we just discovered a new organ, and we're still figuring out how it works. The next decade will bring revolutionary changes in how we think about health, personality, and what it means to be human. Personalized microbiome medicine is coming. Instead of one-size-fits-all treatments, We'll have therapies tailored to your specific bacterial profile. Depression? Here's a bacterial cocktail designed for your particular microbiome. Anxiety? This prebiotic blend will feed your specific beneficial bacteria. Fecal microbiota transplantation, FMT? Yes, poop transplants are already being used for C. difficile infections with amazing success. Researchers are exploring FMT for depression, autism, obesity, and more. The idea of taking someone else's bacteria might seem gross, but if it could cure your depression, designer probiotics are in development. Scientists are engineering bacteria to produce specific therapeutic compounds. Imagine bacteria programmed to produce antidepressants only when they detect inflammation, or bacteria that could diagnose diseases by sensing chemical changes in your gut. The connection between gut bacteria and aging is a hot research area. Can we extend lifespan by maintaining youthful bacterial profiles? Early studies in mice suggest yes. Transferring bacteria from young mice to old mice reverses some aging markers. Human trials are being planned. We're discovering new communication pathways between bacteria and the brain. Bacterial extracellular vesicles, tiny packages of proteins and genetic material, could travel through the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier. They're like bacterial text messages to your brain. The role of viruses in the gut is just beginning to be explored. Your gut contains trillions of viruses, mostly bacteriophages that infect bacteria. These viruses shape bacterial populations and might influence health in ways we're only starting to understand. Artificial intelligence is accelerating discovery. Machine learning can analyze the vast complexity of the microbiome, identifying patterns humans would never spot. AI might predict which probiotics will work for which people, or identify novel bacterial targets for drug development. However, there are challenges ahead. The supplement industry is already full of bogus microbiome products. As the science advances, separating real treatments from snake oil will become harder. We need better regulation and education. Privacy concerns are emerging. Your microbiome is unique, like a fingerprint. Companies collecting microbiome data could potentially identify you, know your health risks, even predict your behavior. We need ethical guidelines for this new frontier. The implications for society are profound. If bacteria influence personality and behavior, what does that mean for free will? For criminal justice? If someone commits a crime partly due to their microbiome, are they fully responsible? These philosophical questions will need answers. Conclusion: embracing your inner ecosystem. So here we are. You started this video as an individual. You're ending it as an ecosystem. You're not just you. You're a colony, a walking planet hosting trillions of tiny life forms that influence your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. This might feel unsettling. We like to think we're in control, that our thoughts and feelings are purely our own. But maybe there's something liberating about recognizing we're part of a larger biological community. Your anxiety might not be a character flaw. It might be a bacterial imbalance. Your cravings aren't weakness. They might be microbial manipulation. The science is clear. Your microbiome matters. It influences your physical health, mental state, personality, even your relationships. But unlike your genes, which you can't change, your microbiome is modifiable. You can shape it through diet, lifestyle, and targeted interventions. This isn't about perfection. It's about awareness and gradual improvement. Maybe you start by adding more fiber to your diet. Maybe you try some fermented foods. Maybe you just become more mindful of how antibiotics and stress affect your bacterial partners. The next time you look in the mirror, remember, you're looking at an ecosystem. Those bacteria aren't invaders or parasites. They're part of you. They've been with humanity since the beginning, shaping our evolution, our cultures, our foods. We wouldn't be human without them. Your bacteria are writing your story as much as you are. The question is, what story do you want to write together? Take care of your bacteria, and they'll take care of you. Feed them well. Give them diversity. Respect their rhythms. In return, they'll support your mood, protect your health, maybe even help you become the person you want to be. Welcome to the microbiome revolution. It's not just changing medicine, it's changing what it means to be human. Actually, I need to correct something I said earlier. I mentioned that bacteria have been around for 3.5 billion years. It's actually closer to 3.8 billion. These organisms have been running the planet far longer than we've been around. We're the newcomers in their world, not the other way around. The future is microbial, and that future is inside you, right now, waiting to be cultivated. Will you grow?